Welcome to Caregiver Cast with Mary Elaine. Are you overwhelmed raising a family, working full-time, caring for a parent or grandparent? It can be challenging when you're doing it alone. Caregiver Cast helps busy, burned-out professionals reduce their stress and overwhelm to create a better caregiving experience for themselves and their loved one. Caregiver Cast brings caregivers together with experts who provide information in a variety of areas. In each episode, you'll get tips on topics such as finance, legal, medical, self-care, community resources, mindset, and more. We're here to make your caregiving journey a more rewarding one. Acquire the confidence and skills to be a more capable caregiver by implementing the resources and strategies from these expert thought leaders. Get a community of support, resources, and strategies for your caregiving journey inside the Caregiver Lifeline community. Visit caregiverlifelinecommunity.com. And now here's your host, Mary Elaine.
Hi, welcome to Caregiver Cast. My name is Mary Elaine, your host. My guest today is Allison Hammond, who will be talking to us about how to discover your community of support. Before I introduce Allison formally, I'm just going to give you some background information about her. So Allison Hammond is a graphic facilitator specializing in people-centered planning services. Individuals and groups looking to design action plans for short or long-term future goals will benefit from this unique approach. Not only is a plan designed, but a group builds community and discovers how the participants will contribute to the action plan and the action steps. The plan is recorded through graphic facilitation, which leaves the individual or the group with a visual representation of the plan. Welcome, Allison, to Caregiver Cast. It's so great to see you.
Thank you so much for having me, Mary Elaine.
Most definitely. So before we get into all of the questions about your company, tell us how you developed your business as a graphic facilitator.
Great. Well, so I worked for an organization that worked with people with disabilities. And in about 10 years ago, I went to Toronto, Canada, and was trained to do processes called paths and maps, which includes graphic facilitation. Mm-hmm. And the first time I did it, I realized this was my calling. Throughout my life in various jobs that I've had, I've often found myself in the role of facilitating groups. I enjoy doing that, and I think I'm good at it. That's why people kept inviting me to do so. But the addition of actually drawing as I'm facilitating and taking graphic notes really touched a core in me, because when I'm doing the graphics, people can really feel heard because they see what they're being said is put on a piece of paper in more than just words. And so what I found, though, was when I was doing plans for people that experience disabilities to help them be in the community with their friends, their family, doing activities outside of assuming that the only things they can do is Special Olympics and live in group homes, which are not bad things, but people have other choices. Someone in the room would always say, "Oh, I need someone to do a plan for me." And it usually was a family member, like a parent that was getting ready to retire, or a sibling who was coming out of college and not really knowing what they wanted to do next, or maybe parents who are getting ready to be empty nesters. And so I found that when I stopped doing that job and working with people with disabilities, I hung out my own shingle and called my business response Able People and Company. And so now, since then, I have been doing plans for a wide variety of people, including still people with disabilities, but a lot of women who are in a life transition and families that are having a parent getting ready to make decisions about downsizing or maybe making decisions about assisted living. So that's really how I got started.
Okay, thank you very much. So why is your business called Response Able People and Company if you're the only employee?
Exactly. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today, is that whenever I do planning processes, I always invite the person to invite other people in their life to participate. So that's the and company. I'm not, a lot of people ask if I'm a coach, and I'm really not a coach. I help people do planning, and they bring other people in their life into the planning process who not only know the person and their gifts, skills, and knowledge, but also can help them with ideas about how to move forward into their future and how they can actually become a support system for the person, not only to encourage them, maybe help them do some things, but also hold them accountable to, are they actually taking steps on their plan that they created? So that's where the community and the and people comes in.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So what did you mean by community? That's really a big word that encompasses many things. So
It sure does. Well, one thing I wanted to share was how I came to also understand why community is important. Throughout my career and my life, I've had lots of opportunities to do a lot of things. And over the years, I've read lots of self-help books, talking about you are enough and you've got this and you're all you need and all those kinds of things. And I do believe those messages are really important. But when I look back over my life, I realize I wouldn't have done most of the things that I've done in my life just by myself on my own, you know, own skills and knowledge. I need other people. So I actually have a little example I like to use. I've got a glass here. And what I like to say is those self-help books help me understand that I'm enough.
yes.
But my glass is really not full in my life if I don't have this top part here full of the people in my community. So yes, while I'm enough and the glass is mostly full, I'm really not going to be able to recognize my full potential without other people in my life. I'm either just building relationships or supporting me or holding me accountable, giving me opportunities, knowing me well enough to know, oh, Allison, you might want to try this, or here's an idea for you to do, or, if I need more information. So one of the exercises that I do, and I'm gonna shift my background here to share with you an exercise that I like to do with people when they're getting ready to work with me. And they say that they're like, well, what do you mean community? How am I going to figure out who's in my community? Well, I'm so excited to share with you. I just got some insight about a whole new way to look at this, but I want to share with you first my it's a valid way to do it, but how I was doing it. So I always ask people, like, who's in your family that they might want to include? Who are their friends that they might want to include? Who maybe colleagues, coworkers, people that have expertise in whatever their interest is. And then when I say community, that's more broad. That could be their faith-based community. It could be social clubs they belong to. It could be neighbors. It could be, people that they know from hobbies that they do. So that's more broadly. And I always ask them to think about who in your community could support you. And people are able to come up with, names to fill in that and who they would like to have come along with them. But just the other day, literally, I was listening to a workshop by a man named Michael Bungay Stanier, who wrote the book, The Advice Trap. And he also has a new book out that's called How to Begin. And I was listening to a thing about how to begin, and he gave me a whole new idea of how to help people think about who to include in their community. And so the first one is warriors. I love this. Who in your community, it could be any of these people, right? But who in your life really stand up for you when times are tough? Who's in your corner? Who do you always know is going to have your back? And those are good people to have in your community. But, sometimes that's really not enough just to have somebody, pumping you up. So the next category would be who in your community is visionary, who can help you see beyond maybe your own potential, what they see for you in your future, and maybe even have ideas of where different places that you could plug in to fulfill whatever your purpose is. And then we've got teachers. And teachers would be people that can have information that you need. And it's interesting when I think about teachers, these may not be people that you interact with all the time, but let's say you're wanting to start a business in, I'm just going to throw this out because I know someone who did it, in roasting coffee beans. and already loved that as a hobby, but really needed more information about how to make it into a business. And so they didn't necessarily know people, but contacted people that know how to do it. So some people might want to find out who in your community can teach you more information about what you want to do. And lastly, it's the healers. Who can you turn to when you're hurt, when you're frustrated, when you've tried something new and it didn't work out, but you need someone to kind of hold your hand and help you get through that and that part of your life. So you can still, look at your friends, your family, who's in your community, colleagues. That's one place to look. But I loved this idea when you're getting ready to do a solution circle, to think about people in this way. And when I do this exercise with people, it's sometimes one of the steps I do before I do a path or a map with them. A lot of times they'll say, well, but I don't really know that person, or they don't have time. People are busy. They won't take time out of their life to help me do this. They're busy, and I'm nervous to ask for help. And I get that. I too have a really hard time myself asking for help because I don't want to bother people. So what I encourage them to do is say, make the call. You will be surprised. I also, when I work with people, say, I'm happy to write up the invitation letter for you. I'm happy to send it out, to email it or snail mail it, however, and have me be the person that does the ask. But I wanted to share a story about a woman that I worked with who she had a very, very high level statewide executive director position. And for health reasons, she had to leave that position. And she was gone in and did not work for about 4 years. And she was ready to jumpstart her career. And she knew that she wasn't going to start back at the level that she was working prior, but she wanted to get back. So she had been talking to friends and family and getting support from them. And they were encouraging her to, apply for this job or look for that. They were doing a lot of shoulding on her. You should do this and you should. So actually a friend of hers contacted me and said, some of her friends want to get together and pay you, Allison, to do a path for her because she really is stuck. And we think we just see her value and it's just not being used. And she's so frustrated. So I did this exercise with her. I did this one. Now, if going back, I would have her do this too. Same thing. She said, oh, all the people that I can think of in my field that are executive directors or program directors or whatever that I worked with, my colleagues, they're really, really busy people. They won't have time for me. I don't want to bother them. And I said, well, I encourage you to go ahead and ask. And she got the courage and she did. Not only did people say yes to her, but a couple of people said, we are so happy you asked us because we miss you. We have wondered where you are. We want to help you get back on the path to your career. And she was blown away because she just didn't realize she had belonged and people missed her. She thought she just disappeared from their life. So I love that story. And so again, so that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about figuring out who in your community. When I do the work that I do, I encourage people to invite as many people as they want to. I do find that a maximum is about 12 and a minimum is 2 to 3. If it's just one more person, sometimes that's not enough insight. If it's more than 12, I find that not everybody really has an opportunity to participate the way that they probably would like to. So that gets a little bit too big. And then I also wanted to say, I have been doing this work virtually. And if it's myself and the other person and they invite 7 people, that's 9 squares on a Zoom screen. And that's enough, because otherwise, those of you who've done Zoom, you know that the squares start getting smaller and people can't see each other as well. Right. So that's what I mean when I talk about community. And this is actually an exercise that I do with people.
Sounds really amazing. So, yes, you've included all these people, and you had a great example with that executive who found out people really did miss her in the workplace. So, why is including people in your life as you plan for life transitions so important?
Well, as I said with my glass, because we don't
Right.
do this alone. And so I have also worked with a couple of people that are coaches. I've worked with people that are, like I said, with some families. And what I find is that when somebody is stuck and they're trying to figure out what their next first steps are,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to include myself in this. I can get all up in my head
Mm-hmm.
and I can start worrying and I can start saying, well, what if this happens? Or, wow, if I try that, that might happen. And I can start second guessing myself.
Mm-hmm.
I can also, because it's just me, I don't see all the possibilities for myself. And I also know that people don't always know their gifts, their skills, their knowledge in their own head. They don't see themselves as other people do. And so when you bring people together, they can really help you get beyond thinking around in your own head. One of the things I like to do is a lot of people will do a vision board. That's a
Mm-hmm.
big popular thing to do. And those are really wonderful. What I like to do is help them then figure out what's your next first step to actually get to that vision.
Mm-hmm.
And my example is on myself again. I know the first time I did a vision board, I came home, I showed it to my husband and my son, and they said, "Oh, that's really nice. That's cool." But when I've actually had a friend of mine do a couple of paths for myself now.
Uh-huh.
And when my husband and my son and my friends and family see where I want to go, they've helped me to build this plan. They know how they can help me because I'm not good at
Okay.
asking for help, but
Mm-hmm.
they can say, "Oh, this is what I can do." Sometimes it's as simple as helping me make a phone call. Sometimes it's as simple as asking me occasionally, "Well, how's it going with one of the steps that I was taking?" So you're not on your own course. And when people do vision boards, which again, I think those are really valuable. I also know a lot of my friends, they don't know where to start because they've got this big vision. And so in all of the processes I use, which is a little different than other kinds of strategic planning, not only in that there's the graphic piece going on, but I try to really simplify it down to what are the next steps you're going to take, 3 to 5. And it depends on the length of the process I'm using. But it could be in the next 2 weeks. It could be what are you going to do in the next 24 to 48 hours that's going to springboard you into taking action on your path. Rather than I find in a lot of other strategic planning, we start talking about where do you want to go?
Mm-hmm.
We get the big picture strategies, and then we may have your objectives, but what are the first actual action steps you're going to take that get you moving forward so you can start seeing some progress?
Thank you. I appreciate all that information. I'm just envisioning, I love those like circles that you've created behind you. So explain a little bit more about the path method that you use.
Sure. And I will change my screen again. I can actually show you a path. Um, So I do a lot of paths. Paths are a plan that's for 6 months to a year.
Okay.
And so when we do a path, the first thing, well, one thing that's missing in this picture, I just realized is usually up here in this area, we talk about what are a person's values, meaning what do they always want to have in their life, whether that be their family, maybe it's something around their faith, maybe it's music. Maybe it's they always want to be doing exercise or they always want to be able to be outdoors and doing things. So it's that really big picture of the kind of some people might call it your purpose. What do you really value? And then we talk about where do you want to be in the next 6 months to a year? And we actually draw out a picture of that. Then we actually back up and we come to where are you right now? Then we have the group talk about what are your gifts, skills, and knowledge. And that's a really fun part. And sometimes that's kind of intimidating for people because we're all just talking about them, but very eye-opening. And then we jump here to these, what I call bold steps. Those are really milestones. They are sort of benchmarks of how do you know that you're moving forward to the next year. And then we come back and we do a few steps. Who's going to do what and by when? And by when in a path, that's usually within the next month. So let me
Okay.
give you an example of that from a young man that I worked with who really wanted to get his driver's license. So by the next year, he wanted to have his driver's license. We talked about where he was now. We knew that this is a young man with some developmental disabilities, but we knew that he did have the skills. He'd already been told, he'd been through some assessment, that he knew that he was going to be able to drive. When we talked about his gifts, we talked about the fact he could read. We talked about the fact that he had friends and family, that people that could help him. And then when we got to the benchmarks, we said, okay, in the next 6 months, he will have at least taken the written part of the driver's test. But
Right.
how is he going to get there? So it was interesting. In the next steps, he had someone in his life say, I will take him every Sunday after church and we'll practice driving. And another person, a family member, said, I'm going to help him study his driver's, the course, the book. And so in 6 months, he'd take the test. Of course, we know, at least in Michigan, he was going to have probably a permit for a while before he actually had his license. So that just kind of gives you, that's a real basic example of how a path can work in somebody's life.
Wow. I do like the visual representation because that really motivates you, I think, more because you see it and now you have to do it. So you
Right.
can apply the action steps a whole lot easier
Uh-huh.
once you have it all delineated out in your picture or your graphic design.
Right. Well, and we know the visual piece of it. First of all, whenever I do this for people, it's actually a big piece of paper on the wall. I give the person the piece of paper, and I've got lots of people I've worked with that they actually take that piece of paper and hang it on their wall someplace, or else they'll have a picture of it made into a poster. But the thing also is that so often when we're doing planning, where people are shuffling paper around, you may have poster, people use easel boards and they do somewhat of this, but maybe not in the whole picture. And so when you're doing a plan, for example, the family I worked with whose mother was moving to assisted living, and really the siblings were all figuring out, what do we really want for the quality of life for our mother when she's in assisted living. And when this is all drawn out, they can go back to it. And when they see where they are now, what the gifts and the different resources each of the siblings brought, they really understand why they're taking the steps they're taking, because it's all in one piece. So often a lot of planning goes, you've got one easel paper where you've talked about certain pieces, and then you flip it over. And then, then you talk about the next thing. This all comes together in one whole thing that, like you said, people can see it, and they can also remember the conversations that they had to know why they chose to do things the way that they're doing them.
And it just, like you've been saying as well, not only see it, but I mean, makes you more accountable.
Exactly.
For whatever actions that you're doing or the bold steps that you're taking. So that makes logical sense. Can you then explain what the MAP process is?
Sure, I've got one of those too. So
I thought so.
So a map is actually, I don't do as many of these because especially within the last couple of years we've had, we know things can change really fast. But a map is really more of a longer term process, looking out maybe over more than a year. And so when we do a map, one thing we start with is we have the person share their story, how they got to be where they are now. And the way I get to that is I don't ask people to tell me their entire biography. I usually ask them for 3 stories, one from their early life, and one from maybe when they were adolescents, college, that kind of age, and then one from a recent story. And I'm asking for these stories to highlight good times in their life when things were going well, so that what it brings forth is, what are their gifts, their skills they've had throughout their life that have brought them to the point. Sometimes they also share things that were troubling in their life, which it does add to, their resilience, or maybe their ways that they've overcome some adversities by sharing those stories. And then, as with the path, we talk about their dream, but this dream can be more about, I'm thinking about now with, let's say somebody's getting ready to retire or thinking they're going to retire within 3 years. So they might be thinking more about, what do I see myself doing when I retire? And so that's a longer term view. We always talk about worries. And again, with people that are retiring, things that can come up with that are not having anything to do, not being near my family, my health, those kinds of worries. And we don't spend a lot of time there, but we want to acknowledge that there's some worries. Then again, we come to what are people's gifts, skills, and knowledge, which can also include some resources. What are their interests? What do they want to be doing? What do they bring from their stories? And then we figure out what kind of things in the community can they be doing and where they might want to be participating, whether it be locally or maybe they want to be traveling, those kinds of things. And then again, we come up with the who's going to do what and by when. And when it's a longer term plan, in the example that I'm using, maybe the who, what, and when is going to happen like in the next couple of months, but that could be, maybe they haven't talked to a financial planner. So maybe that's one of their who, what, and where they need to do right now. That's going to set them up for 3 to 5 years from now. Maybe it is they need to be thinking about, well, what are my hobbies? What do I really love to do? And maybe they don't even know that. So their first step is to figure out what they want to be doing. So even though the path may stay stagnant as far as where they want to go, we can keep revisiting the who, what, and where as they're approaching their retirement, to know that they've set themselves on the path to being able to do what their dreams are when they've retired.
Wow. This sounds so amazing. So are you then just, can you explain the type of clients that you work with? I know you mentioned this person with special needs wanting to drive, someone that's looking to retire and doing all of those steps, or someone that has a dream and needs to figure out how to get there.
Exactly.
Are there a specific group of people that you work with?
Yes, so you and I both in some ways have been on this a journey together with the business and having to kind of narrow our focus because honestly, I feel like this could be beneficial to anybody who's in a life transition or looking towards a life transition. Hold on a second, sorry about that. But so one of the focuses I really have had is on families who have aging parents. And the difficult conversations around downsizing. Where are mom and dad's things going to belong? At what point do we need to have a conversation about driving? Where would mom and dad really like to end up if they really truly want to stay in their own home? That's a different conversation than mom and dad want to, move to a condo and then they're okay with moving to some kind of senior living arrangement to then, into assisted living. So, and then even the example I had with the mom that was moving into assisted living, there were 5 siblings and they were, the older sister said, we were like the Keystone Cops. It wasn't that they weren't getting along. They just didn't know who was responsible for what, or, one of them was already power of attorney, but the other siblings didn't even know what that meant. So I find that this is a real niche. Plus I have a lot of, myself included, my mom is 85, my dad's 88. I have a lot of friends that they're in the same position, and I really feel like I could be a benefit to a lot of families, and investing in me doing this kind of work will actually, I believe, maybe, I don't know how many dollars and cents that it might save. I do know that it will save a lot of confusion, maybe heartache, maybe arguments along the way. The other group that I've really been very successful with is women in life transitions. I've worked with women who are going to be empty nesters. I've worked with women who have started their business and now they're trying to balance that with their family life. I've worked with women who are actually women who are dealing with parents that are aging and trying to balance that with everything else that's going on in their life. So I found that those really are my two niches that I really enjoy working with, and that I also am finding are really receptive to what I'm doing. My other thing I really would like to be doing that I've done a little bit with is working with small groups. So I do have a contract where I'm working with some early childhood educators who are putting together some planning around outreach to families that are difficult to reach with early literacy materials. And so what I was able to do with them, along with, they're educators, so this is step A, B, C, and D.
Right.
But what I've been also working with them on is creating a team so that as they're working through this project that they have right now, what's the next, how will they already be a formed group? So when the next grant or the next project comes along, they already have some systems in place of how they're going to work together by getting to know each other, seeing the value in working together. And then I've also worked with a coach who's working with a small business, and I've actually gone in when she's doing her coaching, and I've just taken graphic notes based on their conversations, and that's been really fun because
Wow.
they did a whole thing around their shared values. They did a whole thing around how they were going to communicate with each other. And my favorite thing out of that they still have hanging on their wall, it's a spiral that goes up and a spiral that goes down. This image came to me as I was listening to them. And if they do the communication things that they're agreeing to, they're going to spiral up and they're going to get better and better, and the business will grow and they're going to grow as people. If they go back to their old ways of communicating, they're going to go spiraling back down into confusion and not getting along and not knowing who's doing what when. So, and they have that hanging up right in their team room to remind them, this is how we want to go. And if we start seeing, this is why this is happening, because we're going back to our old ways of communicating. So that's been really rewarding for me as well. So that's kind of three groups.
Okay. I like them. I would think it would be really helpful for a caregiver, and B, their loved one, if they have to move or are choosing to move elsewhere, or like you said, just with companies that really want to increase their communication with their employees and their customers. So makes much sense to like you've been doing, showing us the who, what, and when, so it's very clear as to everybody's responsibility in order to work together in the best way possible. I hear that you have, can you give us 3 takeaways, Allison, about MAP or PATH?
Sure.
Please.
So the number one thing that's really unique about what I do is the visual piece. As you can see, it's stick figures, but 65% of people actually are visual learners, probably thrown in with some other things, but also are visual learners. And so it's the visuals that help people that are being involved really see and feel like they've been heard. And then when it's all together in one image that's together, they really can see the big picture of what they're trying to accomplish. And yet I've helped them drill down to what are some specific steps. The second thing is the community. I want, even if people don't get anything else out of this, I'm hoping that if they're working with a coach or they're a family member because there are a lot of people taking care of aging parents who are doing it by themselves, to reach out. People really do want to help you. They may not know how. And through what I do, it helps people understand that, yes, you can ask for help. Yes, people want to help. And number 3, people then know how to help.
Yes.
How often has somebody said, let me know if you need anything? Well, if you're in the middle of trying to figure something out with your parents, you may not know what you need unless you take a pause and sit and do a process like this. And then your friends and family and colleagues and whoever else can help you. And the third takeaway is the steps. I am a big picture thinker. So I think that's one reason why I love doing this. But what I also love is that I help you figure out what is the real challenge that you're trying to work on. What is it really that you want to be doing? And then when we break it down into what are 3 to 5 doable steps, specific, now I'm thinking about STAR goals, but it really does fit into that, specific, truly doable, action oriented, not just, I want to start doing something more often. That's not a specific thing. This is an action step. And then is it relevant? Does it really make sense? Which brings me back a little bit to what I was going to say is, this is not, part of this is a little bit of brainstorming when we're trying to think about what people are going to do, but we really focus in, because when you're just having conversations with your friends and they're just batting around ideas, sometimes they're not really relevant, and you don't want to be mean and go, I'm not doing that. That doesn't really fit with me. But when we're doing this and we're talking about your gifts, skills, and knowledge, then it starts to make more sense why your friend may not say, oh, you should go do this, because they realize, well, that's really not within this person's interests or their gifts. So it helps with the shoulding on each other piece.
Oh, good. Thank you. Don't like that should have, would have.
No, I don't do well with that either.
No. Yeah. Give me a suggestion and I'll work with it.
Right.
But don't tell me I should or shouldn't or have or haven't. Yeah. Wouldn't. So you have a special offer for
I
our
do.
listeners today?
So I do a very specific process that's called a solution circle. And I'm going to remember which one this is. I think it's this one. Yep. You may not be able to see this as well, but a solution is a very prescribed 5-step process to help you figure out your next first step when you're trying to move forward, either to make a decision, maybe you're overwhelmed about something, you're trying to prioritize. It could be that you've got a project, or this example I have is you've got an idea, but you don't know where to get started. And so the 5 steps, it takes about an hour total to do this when you look at introducing and whatever, but each step is very prescribed. So in the first step, for 6 minutes, the focus person gets to talk about what is their dilemma, or what's their idea, what are they looking for? And they talk for 6 minutes and nobody else talks. That's the first step. In the second step, the group talks and the focus person does not talk. And when they do this part, they're not going to start coming up with ideas of what to do yet. What they're really doing is clarifying what they heard the person say. What is the person's real dilemma? What are they asking for? Maybe in there they say, oh, but they've already got these resources. They've moved this far. They talk about that. In the third step, I call that practical focus brainstorming. And this is when everybody can talk and generate ideas, and people can ask clarifying questions of the person. And then in the fourth step, the person identifies what are 3 to 5 steps that they're willing to take, the who, when, and what, to move forward. And then in the last 6 minutes, each of these things is 6 minutes. They come up with what they claim their next first step that they're going to take in the next 24 to 48 hours. And along with that step is who in the group is going to support them to do that. Maybe it's just calling them to say, did you do that? Or maybe it's helping them make a phone call. Maybe it's introducing them to something. Maybe it's helping them find a resource. So it's very clear. And every time I do this, the person at the end will say, that is not at all what I thought my next first step was going to be, because they've been in their head, and their group really helps them figure out what is your real challenge right at this moment. And a woman that I worked with, she was starting a business and she was going to do it online, and she had all kinds of, she's got her certification, she's got her program written, all these things. And when it came down to it, as everyone was talking, she really didn't have the technology to do it. So her next first step was to learn some technology, because she just hadn't even thought about that piece. And if she didn't feel silly or like, why didn't I think of that? It's because she had all her ducks in a row for her program. and was ready to go, but she didn't know how to do that. So anyway, I love that idea. And she was so grateful because she thought,
Mm,
oh, I was going to start doing this. And I realize now I need help just figuring that out. And it really was, she has technology information. She just needed to learn some of the tools in Zoom to be able to do it. So I love that. Anyway, that is usually $100. And so I'm offering it to anybody who's watching here for half price, which would be $50. And I don't have my screen up with my QR code, but I can share the information of how to get a hold of me with Mary Elaine, so that you can have a conversation with me, because you won't just contact me and we can do a solution circle. I need to visit with you a little bit, but also we need to set up who's going to come along with you. So
right.
it won't just be you,
Exactly.
it'll be you and at least 2 other people that need to fit into the schedule of when you'll do your solution circle.
Wow. Thank you so much for that solution circle planning session. I like the way you've set it out, and it's very clear as to how you go through the whole process. I like it because caregivers sometimes don't know what to do. So just going through this process would be so beneficial to them, to clarify what they really need to do, and then give them, like you said, action steps to go and do it instead of spinning it up in our head like
Right.
I do
Um,
myself.
the nice thing about a solution circle is that once you've been through it, it's a tool you can use yourself. You don't have to draw all the pictures to do a solution circle. And you might find this interesting, Mary Elaine. I recently was reading about some Quaker, and the Quakers actually have a tradition of what's called a discernment circle.
Mm,
And it's very similar to this. The person who needs to discern something, maybe about their faith or their life, gets to talk. And then the people in their community, then they don't talk, give them ideas. And then the person comes up with what they're discerning their next step should be. I found that fascinating. I don't know if that there's any connection with the people that developed the solution circle, but it really is it's almost like a back to how human beings, we do gather and we do help and support each other. We've just kind of given a formula to it.
yes. Thank you for that example. I don't think I've heard of that either, about the Quakers. I think, though, it's a great planning tool. It's good to actually put what you're thinking on a piece of paper. And if you can draw it and use yourself as a graphic facilitator, it makes it much more impactful
Uh-huh.
to have it both the visual and the written word, because then you're more likely to actually do something.
Exactly.
So, Alison, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate your
Oh,
time
I
and
appreciate
sharing.
it very much, Mary Ellen. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to the Caregiver Cast today. Get a community of support, resources, and strategies for your caregiving journey inside the Caregiver Lifeline community. Visit caregiverlifelinecommunity.com. Get involved with the show. Send your email to mpetrucci2002@gmail.com. And we'll see you again next week for another episode of Caregiver Cast.